Day on the expansion application that we're administering almost exactly at the same time. Today we're going to focus on the startup funding opportunity. I'm Renee Toulson with Strengthening Families Washington, and on my right, maybe your left, is Yvonne Orquilla, also from Strengthening Families. We also have Liv Woodstrom on the phone with Thrive Washington, who'll be talking a little bit later. So the purpose of today's webinar is to announce this competitive special startup funding opportunity with the Home Visiting Services account. We're going to outline some of the requirements and priorities associated with that funding opportunity and invite submission of proposals. All of this information is available on the Home Visiting page of the DCYF website. And I did forget to say at the very beginning, we're here at the new Department of Children, Youth, and Families, formerly DEL, so hopefully there's no confusion there. Let's go to the next slide. And just out of curiosity, we're interested in hearing from you. Are we at the next slide?
No, you need to do one more.
Is your organization currently receiving funding from DCYF through the Home Visiting Services account to deliver home visiting services? So just check yes or no, and we'll give that a minute to see, just out of curiosity. Are you getting, and this would include anybody receiving McVie, TANF, or state funds to deliver home visiting through the HVSA. So are you a current contractor? Okay, we've closed the poll. What do we get?
63% no, 38% yes.
Great. So about 2/3 of you are new to the HVSA. So let's go to the next slide, our agenda. Welcome, and hopefully this will be explanatory. We are, for those of you who are new, running 2 additional webinars to try to help explain some of the expectations and requirements associated with being part of the HVSA. We'll talk a little bit about more of those later, so we'll give some introduction to that now, but there's a lot to know, so we thought we'd give you a chance to learn more by offering additional webinars. So here's our agenda for today. Technically, we consider the HVSA, the Home Visiting Services account, the funder. We're going to give you an overview of the HVSA, describe the funding opportunity, talk a little bit about the application and how the components of it and the process for applying. And then we have time at the end where we will answer questions. We are recording this webinar and the slides are available PDF. We'll be posting the recording and the slides on the Home Visiting webpage of the DCYF website. So all the questions and all the conversation that will happen will be part of that recording. We also will be assembling a document summarizing all of the questions and the answers to those questions later.
Hi there, this is Yvonne Orquilla, and I'm going to jump right into the Home Visiting Services account. In 2010, the Washington State Legislature established the Home Visiting Services account. The purpose of the account is to increase the availability of high-quality, evidence-based, research-based, and promising home visiting practices in Washington State. Next slide. The HVSA currently holds contracts with 39 local implementing agencies, LIAs. The annual investment is $10.8 million, and this is about to go up to $1.5 million this year. The actual account resides within the state treasury and is administered by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. HVSA legislation guides the expenditures, bid process, and values this work. The HVSA is overseen by a partnership group consisting of secretaries of DCYF, Thrive Washington, Department of Health, and Department of Social Health and Services. Please note we have DCYF, Thrive, and DOH working in close partnership to manage and support the HVSA. Next slide. according to the legislation, HVSA funds must be used for implementation of evidence-based, research-based, and promising home visiting models. The HVSA's overarching goals are to enhance child development and well-being, alleviate effects of poverty and other known risk factors, reduce the incidence of child abuse and neglect, and promote school readiness for young children and their families. HVSA legislation specifies that the funds must be administered through a competitive bid process. Okay, next slide. The vision of DCYF is that all Washington's children and youth grow up in safe and healthy, thriving physically, emotionally, and educationally nurtured by family and community. The vision aligns with the goals and values of the HVSA. The HVSA investments are informed with those values listed here that were developed through a collaborative work of Washington's many home visiting stakeholders, including the HVSA Advisory Committee. For example, the HVSA takes a portfolio approach by funding a range of home visiting models to meet the diverse needs across communities in Washington. Diverse representation from diverse geographic, racial, and cultural communities, a range of capacity, investing in organizations along with a wide spectrum of capacity, small to large organizations. Contractor, LIA participation, fostering partnership relationships between contractors, technical assistance, continuous quality improvement, and evaluation. Okay, next slide. Okay. The HVSA has developed an aligned evaluation framework for home visiting programs to measure impact of home visiting that is established by our federal maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting (MCV) program, administered through the Health Resources and Services Administration, that we have aligned across all home visiting programs funded across the HVSA. This framework addresses the domains listed in this slide. The first one is improved maternal and newborn health, prevention of child injuries, child abuse, neglect, maltreatment, and reduction of emergency department visits, improvement in school readiness and achievement, reduction in crime and domestic violence, improvements in family economic self-sufficiency, and improvements in the coordination and referrals for other community resources and support. So all contractors agree to collect and share data on aligned measures for participants in the HVSA funded programs. We'll have more of this information during our data webinar. So our work is grounded in implementation science, which Liv at Thrive will address in the next few slides. Are you ready, Liv?
Oh, she's got to be unmuted.
We're unmuted, Liv. Hang on.
Whenever you're ready, just say hello, Liv, or say hello now. And
She's not unmuted.
Her audio.
she was talking earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Liv, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Maybe
Yeah.
you're on mute.
Can you unmute Catherine? Oh, perfect.
Oh, I think
Oh,
I
there
think
you
we
go.
just got it.
Hear you.
Yep. we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I'm Liv Wittstrom with Thrive Washington, and I'll provide a little bit of information about implementation science, and then provide a really brief overview of our technical assistance team, which supports implementation in the field. So really briefly, implementation science is a body of research that's held by the University of North Carolina on the factors that lead to effective implementation of a specific intervention. The HVSA, and in particular the Hub, uses this framework for how we support home visiting programs. While there are many components of implementation science, the ones we utilize most often are implementation stages and implementation drivers. Next slide. So implementation science breaks the process of implementation into 4 stages. It's exploration, which is to assess if you want to start up a new program and what that looks like within your community. And then it's installing of the new service or program, and then initially implementing, and then fully implementing the service. So what we can really see is that programs require different levels of support depending on what stage of implementation they may be in. You'll also note here in the visual, the Hub has added 2 additional stages, which is fully implementing expanding, and then fully implementing staff transition. And we've done this as we know that there are unique types of supports that programs need during these periods that are specific to home visiting as an intervention. So for this funding opportunity, we're specifically looking to fund programs that are ready to begin the installation stage. Programs in the installation stage have already done research and planning about what type of home visiting program best meets an existing gap in their community, and have selected a local implementing agency that is best poised to house the home visiting program. They've already started developing referral relationships with local service providers based on mutual collaboration during the exploration process. Next slide. So implementation science also describes key drivers that lead to success in implementing an intervention. We have customized this for home visiting specifically by adding a 4th driver category, which is connection to the community. Each year, programs submit a self-reflection tool evaluating their program in each of these drivers and the stages, and together, the technical assistance provider in the home visiting program use this to create an individual technical assistance plan for the year that addresses each program's unique needs and strengths. Next slide. So, and actually, is there one more slide after that, Renee?
Yeah.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? Great. So to develop and maintain the infrastructure for home visiting programs, including training, quality improvement, and evaluation as required by the HVSA statute, Thrive serves as the implementation hub. The hub is comprised of model-specific leads and a quality improvement manager that supports all of the HVSA-funded programs. Resources that are part of the hub and the supports that you get from the team are regarding model fidelity, continuous quality improvement, coaching, training, and technical assistance, in addition to offering communities of practice regarding important topics that we see are important for skill building within home visiting. All awarded grantees are required to participate in all aspects of the implementation hub technical assistance. And next slide. You can see here, this is a list of, for this opportunity, the folks that would be most relevant in terms of model-specific expertise and then also supports in community planning. So consider this team a resource as you think about submitting your application if you have questions around guidance of the model. And I think that's it. Thank you. Passing it back.
Thanks, Liv.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are now going to be talking about the Department of Health and how we work together. So DCYF contracts with the Department of Health to lead the data monitoring and evaluation efforts for the HVSA. This includes data sharing agreements with each of the programs to facilitate sharing the program data with DOH. So DOH manages the data processing and reporting to meet state and national funding requirements. DOH works closely with funded programs to ensure complete and timely data reporting and provides data back to programs to support continuous quality improvement and overall HVSA evaluation efforts. Next slide. Okay, so in 2017, the Department of Early Learning conducted a home visiting scan which identified 8,852 home visiting slots across 9 models in Washington, all funded using state dollars. The home visiting scan can be found on the home visiting page on the DCYF website. Currently, the HVSA funds approximately 2,100 slots. This amounts to about 25% of all voluntarily early childhood home visiting slots in Washington. The available home visiting slots contrasts starkly with the need, based in the 2017 home visiting needs assessment, and is estimated to be 126,157 families would benefit from home visiting. During the last legislative session, the legislature authorized additional 1.5 million funds to expand the reach of home visiting. These funds are the source of the HVSA funds for this funding opportunity. We are running 2 separate procurements concurrently. So today's webinar is the startup installation, and that is this funding opportunity. Last week we had a webinar for the 1 million to expand slots in home visiting. So you'll probably be hearing about both of them as we move forward.
And let me just add that of the whole 1.5 million, 25% of the funding it's hoped that up to 25% would go towards research-based or promising practices models and 75% to the evidence-based. But we're not going to make that decision until we see the slate of candidates that come through in both procurements. So our goal is to broaden the portfolio to include the promising practice and the research-based models. And so we're hoping to do that in part through this procurement. Next slide. The term of the funding is a little bit wonky because of when we're offering this procurement. Because we're within the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, we run the state fiscal year. So contracts run up through the end of June 30th. And we're running a procurement mid-year, so that means the first year of funding will be less than a full year of implementation. So what that means is that we're asking you to actually kind of think about how you're applying both in 2 kind of increments, a 7-month increment for really the initial startup of the startup, and then more of an ongoing 12-month period. We only have $500,000 total to offer to this entire procurement, and we're asking organizations to submit budgets that would be the annual ongoing budget portion for $100,000 to $250,000. So what that means is, if we kind of think backwards, the full year of implementation, your ongoing implementation, would be up to $250,000. Your first budget, which is 7 months, would be 7 months of that, but it would represent the startup costs, which might be unique to the startup period. We'll go a little bit more into detail on budgeting in our webinar that we're going to do tomorrow, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about it later in the budget section of the application request. So we'll move on. I expect we'll probably get a few questions on that because I don't think I explained it very clearly. Let's go to the next slide. So as Liv mentioned, this funding opportunity is geared towards programs that are really in a readiness phase to start up and install a home visiting program, which means they've completed a structured readiness and assessment planning process. And that process that will have resulted in the demonstration of a need in the community or with a specific population within your community that usually can be founded within the needs assessment that was conducted in 2017. So on September 5th, we're going to do an in-depth webinar on the data requirements of the HVSA, and a portion of that will be talking about the home visiting needs assessment that was conducted and build your understanding of that so you can see how the community that you're proposing for startup, how the needs might be evident in that home visiting needs assessment. So anyway, your planning process will have demonstrated that there is need in your community or with a population that you're proposing to serve, and that you've explored and selected an eligible home visiting model, and that you can demonstrate as an organization the readiness to install or begin implementation, that you have systems in place to implement all of the requirements of the model and also of being a contractor within Department of Children, Youth, and Families. So that means you're going to have some infrastructure supports around recruiting and managing high quality staff, that you're going to have intensive model, administrative, and data supports in place, and that your data capacity ready, because you're going to need to be doing data collection once you begin implementation. So organizations that have been fully implementing a home visiting program for a year or longer whether or not they are funded by the HVSA currently, should apply under this only if they're seeking to, funds for a new program model. So if you're thinking, oh, I've been running this program for 18 months, we're fully implementing, then you should either look at expansion in the procurement that we talked about earlier, or you should be deciding that you also want to run a different program model, and that would make you eligible for startup funding under this funding opportunity. I'm done with that slide. However, I feel like I got all the unclear slides here. Anyway, and I'm not doing a very good job of clarifying them. So within that, eligible organizations who can apply for this funding opportunity would be any local government agency, health department, school districts, cities, like that. A nonprofit organization may apply, whether you have a local or a regional or statewide purview, educational institutions, and also federally recognized tribes who are located in Washington State. Okay, next slide. You're eligible to apply as a program if you're starting up, as we said earlier, an eligible home visiting program model, which we'll talk about on the next slide, and if you plan to serve children between the ages of 0 and 4 years old. So that means prenatal up through a child's 5th birthday. These funds cannot be used to supplant existing funds directed at home visiting. They're intended to be additional funds. So let's go to the next slide. The slide on, or the programs listed on this slide are those models that are currently operational in Washington State, and those are the models that we that are eligible to apply under this opportunity. We're not bringing in any new models into Washington State, so if your program is listed on this list, then you're eligible to apply for startup funding. So go to the next slide. One major criteria of the startup application is to address unmet need in communities. So applicants within the application are going to be asked to describe the community need and the risk context within which they are proposing their home visiting program. So you'll also be asked to address the needs and the risks. We're going to talk a lot about this. I think we can go to the next slide. This is kind of an introduction to the webinar that's happening on September 5th, which will be led by the Department of Health. In 2017, DCYF contracted with Department of Health to complete a home visiting needs assessment to really understand the needs across the state of Washington and to identify which communities would benefit from home visiting services. So what they've done through that needs assessment is estimate the distribution of families across the state who would benefit from home visiting. And so a successful applicant will have studied that needs assessment and understand the needs in their community as it relates to what was presented in the needs assessment. You may also include local data and to support your argument for community need. And here's information we're going to have. This is information that includes the website where you can find the needs assessment and other supporting documentation related to that. And then we'll talk a lot more about it in detail on September 5th. And also, I think Martha said she would give examples of how you can use the needs assessment to focus resources to the populations that might benefit it within your community. The next slide lists the priority populations that the HVSA has identified that they want to target their services. So this is a list of a lot of different characteristics and experiences of families across the state. Your home visiting program would not need to serve every single one of these bullets, but the participants within your program would need to be found on this list. So at least they would need to have at least one or more of these characteristics to be eligible for HVSA services. I'll pause for a minute so you can read the list. But this is the list we also have in our contract. So next slide. I think it's really important for applicants to know that implementation science is truly the foundation from which we make determinations around when and how to offer funding. So when you looked at that slide that Liv presented about the different stages, it's really important to look at that and figure out where you fit within that in that framework. Because of that, though the implementation science informs our priorities, which are listed on this page. So when you think about that, and these are all listed in detail in the application guide that accompanies the application questions. So you can find all of that, again, on the home visiting webpage. So if we go through this, we've talked a lot about it already. I have the community need. One of the priorities is that there's evidence of unmet community need that warrants startup. And basically that the demand for services exceeds the supply. And that, then there's enough children in your community that warrant the generation of a whole new home visiting program. Next, that you're able to demonstrate the model and the organizational fit within your community so that the elements of the model support the needs or would address the needs of the community that you're trying to serve, and that your organization is well positioned to provide that service within the community you propose. Next, we want to see supporting the diverse communities across the state of Washington. So we recognize that there's a lot of different types of communities across our state, and our goal is to try to make sure that we have a diverse representation amongst those communities, and that organizations are able to attend to those diverse needs that they propose, whether that be through cultural competency or trauma-informed practices, but always through strength-based approaches. Next, we'd like to see an organization's commitment to home visiting. So this means that an organization will have a long-term commitment to the program, that they propose, what they propose in the startup advances the mission and the vision and the values of the organization, and that the organization is willing to sustain a high-quality program without the guarantee of increasing HVSA funds. So the organization is really behind this program. And next, kind of related to that the organization has the capacity to implement the services that you propose. So that means you have financial stability, your organization is healthy, you're equipped to manage a state contract, you have infrastructure that will support the program, such as fiscal, human resources, data management, and administration. And also that you have a really clear plan for startup. Next, we like to see a commitment to implementation with quality. Things like continuous quality improvement, reflective supervision, and ongoing training are in place. And there's a willingness on the part of the organization and the program to access technical assistance resources. We also like to see that this program will contribute to a strong, coordinated system of services supporting young children and families. And there's an element in all of our contracts of connecting to this other systems that are in place in your community. And finally, it's really important that the organization is engaged and reflective, willing to learn and willing to improve as part of this larger HVSA team. As reviewers look at review your application, they'll be balancing these priorities along with looking at the whole portfolio that we currently fund, trying to see a balance across program models, geography, and high-need communities. We'll fund a range of programs and organizations, so we want to see a balance in geography as well as size of organization. And as I think I mentioned earlier, we're hoping that we can, that 25% of the funds will be directed towards promising practices and research-based models, in addition to the high prevalence we have right now of the evidence-based models. Next slide. So the very first step in the process is to submit a letter of intent to apply. So you're not binding yourself to anything by submitting this letter, which unfortunately is due Friday, given a short turnaround time. What we're going to be doing with these letters of intent is simply that helps us plan for our review panels. So we're asking you to submit on Friday by, I think by noon. It's a form to fill out which asks your name of your organization, contact information, the model that you're proposing, an estimate of your budget, and an estimate of the number of families you think you'll serve. And by that we say your caseload at any given time. You're not going to be bound to anything on this letter of intent. It's simply we need it for planning purposes. So It's like a placeholder for your application. You can access it electronically on the home visiting webpage. It's actually the last page of the application guidance. It's not its own file, but you can pull that out and submit it. We're asking you to submit it to what we call the home visiting inbox. It's home.visiting@dcyf.wa.gov. Next slide. So this slide lists the 7 components of the application. We're going to go into detail on several of these sections, but just wanted to, so you see that there's 7 parts, and mention that the application guidance that is located on the web page is very helpful in describing both the priorities and what we're looking for, and also in helping you figure out how to answer some of the questions on this application. So it's worth your study. Let's go to the next slide. The first section of the application, which I'm skipping, is really just contact information. But section 2 is your project overview. And this is just a brief summary of your startup request. It's an abstract, what you think, what your 7-month budget will be, basically the first 7 months of the project, and then what you think your 12-month budget will be, just the total numbers, and then the number of families that you're proposing to serve. And when we in the HVSA call this the number of slots, it's basically at any given time how many families will be on your caseload. It's not over the year how many families you're going to serve unduplicated. It's if we're funding you to serve 30 or to visit 30 families a month, the number would be 30. So that's just explanation. So again, a project overview is just like your abstract. It's what are you going to do in a nutshell. Section 3, the next slide. Section 3, I'd say, is a really super important part of the application, because here's where the applicants will describe the unmet need in the proposed community and how that proposed target population aligns with the HVSA priorities that you saw we talked about earlier. Part of this section also seeks to build a picture of the existing resources in the community, as well as what resources are there and how you're proposing to meet those needs. It's also, what's not on here is a description of the exploration and the planning process and the partners involved. So the very first section of this is really tell us how you got to where you are now that you want to implement a home visiting program. How did the planning process take place in your community and who was involved? We can go to the next slide. Section 4 is a description of your organization capacity. So to be successful, we know that home visiting programs must be housed within organizations that will offer support and guidance from policy and program level. That without that support, programs will flounder. So in this section of the application, we're trying to learn about the organization in which this home visiting program will sit. We want to learn about your management, your structure, where the program fits within the overall strategic direction of your organization, and how they relate to the priorities of your organization. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about this at our webinar starting at 1:30, which we'll have more information about how to connect in with that later. Next slide. So number 5 of the application is your implementation plan. The implementation plan foreshadows your contract should you be a successful applicant. So be careful what you write in there, because that's what we hold you to. This is the nitty-gritty of how you plan to expand. So it should be well devised, thought out, and complete. You can see the elements of the implementation plan listed here. And so you need to thoroughly think through how you're going to approach all of these things. And I would say, again, use the application guide, because it's going to tell you a lot about how to calculate staffing, how to calculate caseload, what program quality and fidelity look like. Really important aspect of this is that what you plan in your implementation plan must align with what you propose in your budget. So for example, if you're planning to hire 1.5 home visitors, then we see 1.5 home visitors in your budget. Then we'd also see a training plan in your implementation plan. We'd see the training costs in your budget, that kind of thing. So we want to see that level of alignment. Next slide. The next section is your budget. and I'll spend a little bit more time on this tomorrow, but there's an Excel template that we're asked that's also available on the home visiting webpage. We're asking that you use this template. If you submit a PDF version or a Word version or some other format, you won't be eligible for funding because we need the template in Excel. So please use the template that we provide and don't alter it in any way other than by adding your numbers and your explanation on it. Within that budget template, you'll find two tabs, a 7-month startup tab and then a 12-month ongoing tab. And so here's where you need to actually submit both tabs and fill them out. The first one being just what you think is going to take to start up your program for the first 7 months, which would include recruiting your staff and bringing staff on. It would include training costs associated with any model required trainings or other trainings that are going to be costs that to get your staff eligible to deliver home visits. It's going to include any startup costs around supplies or equipment or materials. So, or it also might include if there are initial model fees. So those things are not necessarily ongoing costs, but you would incur those costs to start up your program. The 12-month budget is, and that's the budget, the 7-month budget is if you are successful, that's going to be the budget of your contract because your contract's going to go for 7 months. And then we anticipate renewing your contract at the 12-month level. And so the 12-month budget is the budget that we would then think of you as, that's your contract allotment for the year. Typically those budgets are not increasing over time, so you need to build a really healthy 12-month budget that will deliver the services that you propose to deliver. So for example, if in your implementation plan, again, you propose serving 30 families, then this is what the budget is going to, what's going to cost your organization to deliver services to support those 30 families. So the money and the caseload are tied together. Your ongoing budget is going to reflect your ongoing staffing expenses at 12 months, your ongoing kind of expected training, your ongoing travel to deliver home visits, that kind of thing. And certainly with both budgets, you're allowed up to a 10% indirect rate that you can charge of the direct costs, unless you have a federally negotiated rate, and then you can exceed that rate. But if you do have a federally negotiated rate, you have to provide evidence of that by submitting a signed certification document with your application. Again, we'll spend a little more time on the budget tomorrow, but that's and there's a lot of information also in the application guide. So let's go to the next slide. I have to say, it's really nice not having a lot of technical difficulties during a webinar. If any of you were here on Thursday, it was a quite different experience. So the final section of the application is your supporting documents. And here's where we're going to learn a little bit more about your organization capacity, but we're also going to get a sense of your relationship to your community. So all of these documents can be PDF versions, and we want them to be attached to your application. And there's a couple ones I wanted to highlight in terms of you should pay close attention to. So towards the end, it says 3 organization references. We want at least one of those reference letters, or it doesn't have to be a letter, it just has to be a name and contact information. It has to be from a current funder of your organization. At least one organization that describes your relationship with your community partners, and at least one that describes your organization's ability to reach the families that you identify in your proposal. So 3 letters and kind of addressing those 3 criteria. Those 3 criteria are listed in the application, so you don't have to worry about it if you didn't get them all written down. It's on the application document. And it's also in the guidance. And then the other one I wanted to call your attention to is up to, but not more than, 3 letters of support from your planning process collaborators. So these are folks who can speak to the efficacy of your organization's capacity for providing home visiting in this community. And so, and how you participated in the planning, how you all addressed your how you kind of came to this proposal. Up to 3 letters. All right, move on.
Okay.
So just a reminder, applications are due by 4 p.m. on October 3rd. We recommend using Arial font 11 and margins no less than 1 inch. Sections 1 through 5 may not exceed the 32 pages. And please use, for section 6, please use the budgets that are the templates that are provided. And for section 7, all of the supplemental documents that Renee just talked about, please make sure that those are attached. And for any folks that are currently receiving DCYF or HVSA funding, the asterisk that was on the previous slide, those documents don't need to be included, but those are just for folks that are current contractors. Let's see, next slide. Okay. So the review process will start with a compliance review, and we'll review the eligibility of other requirements outlined in the application. And part 2 of the review is the applications will be reviewed and scored individually by partners with expertise in home visiting. We'll have a collaborative review. Reviewers here will evaluate and score the proposals collectively to make recommendations for the finalists. The part 4 is finalist presentation, question and answer. So finalists will participate in a 2 to 3 hour presentation and a question and answer section. This presentation will occur on site at the proposed program location. Finalists will have a minimum of 7 days in advance notice of the presentation time frame and content expectations. Finalists will have opportunity to participate in scheduling the presentation. So part 5 of this is funding decisions. The decision to contract with the applicants will be determined according to priorities outlined in the funding priorities section of the guidance document. All funding recommendations will be evaluated by the home visiting management team. We anticipate decisions will be made and successful applicants will be notified by November 7th. Next slide. So on this slide, you will see some of the opportunities that are coming up for webinars. And the next one is tomorrow at 1:30. Then the second one for data and monitoring requirements is September 5th at 9:30. So, and also all of the webinars will be recorded, and you'll see the link at the very top of this slide here and on the Dell website. Next slide.
DCYF website.
Sorry, DCYF. I knew I was going to do that. Okay, so now we are going to move into the Q&A portion of today's webinar, and questions asked during the webinar as well as those submitted to the HV inbox. And again, that's home.visiting@dcyf.wa.gov. Any questions submitted prior to 5 p.m. on September 17th will be consolidated and responses will be assembled in an FAQ document. It will be posted on the DCYF website by September 24th. If you do have additional questions after today, please make sure that you title the email something along the lines 2018 startup application question, so we know to make sure we focus on that. And if you do have any questions about model fidelity, you'll want to contact the Thrive Hub at hub@thrivewa.org. Again, it's on the website, it's on the slide. So now we're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A portion, and go ahead.
We got key dates.
Go to the next
Yeah,
slide
go
just
ahead.
a second.
Oh,
Yeah. So you'll see on the next slide here is all of the key dates that we've been talking about throughout the presentation. And we'll go ahead and leave this up for a second, but we'll go right into all of the questions and answers right now. And again, these questions and answers will be posted online on September 24th. You'll see it on your key dates. So please type in your questions now to the question box, and we will attempt to answer them at this time.
Okay, you guys ready for your first one?
Mhm.
Are there any requirements that an agency shows approval from the national office of a model for the application, or just readiness to work with the national office?
At this point, it's readiness to work with the national office. Well, now that's different from our expansion application, but for the startup, just readiness. Do I need to repeat the question?
Slide 17 shows annually ongoing budget max 25,000.
Oh, does it? That's a mistake. Should say 250.
Yeah.
Can we go back to it?
Then slide 32 shows max 200,000.
It should say 250.
Wait, well, I don't know what they're looking at. My slide says 250.
Mine too.
So slide.
Oh, okay, so it's 250 versus 200. Just clarifying now.
Okay, so which slide 32 must be wrong then?
Yeah,
32
32
shows
is wrong.
200,000. So
Sorry about that. Thank you.
We're gonna correct that for the PDF on the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, that our other one is 200,000.
okay. Can a program serve more than one county, or should it focus on one county?
I think that's actually a question that you want to ask as an applicant. If you can demonstrate the need and it spans geographic, kind of a political boundary, and you can do it and you have the capacity to serve multi-county, that's your decision to make. So.
We have a couple more minutes for questions. If anybody has any more questions, please kick them in now.
I did want to say, I forgot to say this in the priority section. I think we say it earlier, but we might not have. I know it's in the application guidance, but when you're creating your budget, there's no benefit to undercutting your budget. We're not going to penalize anybody for asking for exactly 250,000, but we also don't want you to ask for 250,000 if that's not what you need. But we want to encourage programs to really thoughtfully consider their budgets and not try to poise their budgets in a way that they think might be competitive. So, I mean, this is a competition, but it's still, we're interested in quality implementation.
Next question is there a requirement for implementation serving families to begin by a certain date?
So, because this is, okay, so there's a requirement to begin serving. No, there's actually no requirement, although what will happen with programs is you'll work to develop an implementation startup plan with your model lead or at Thrive. And the expectation is that you'd likely be providing direct services to families within the first year, within that first 7-month time period. So, but there's no hard and fast deadline, particularly because we know that staff recruitment takes time, staff training takes time, and those things need to be in place and solid before you can start delivering home visits.
Will programs be eligible if already receiving funding from VSK Parent-Child Home Program?
I think you have to look at how you fit within the framework of implementation science. If you're a brand new program and you're still, you feel like you fit in that startup phase, then this is where you fit. And if you have other funding so that you can have, that's up to you. So I'd say that's not really a factor. It's where you fit within the framework of implementation science. So if you're already delivering home visiting, then you have to think about, I'm not sure where you fit on the implementation science framework.
The link to the LOI on the website didn't seem to work last week. Do you know if it is working now or if it was just my user error? This is the first, I can answer this one. This is the first I'm hearing of it. I will double check that today and work with our webmaster to make sure that that's functioning correctly.
So
Sometimes Chrome works better.
Sometimes Chrome versus Internet Explorer, we've been having that issue a lot with the ECYF website. So try it with both.
and I think the LOI is the last page of the application guide too. So if you can't get it directly through the website, you can go to download the application guide and just pull that out. So, but it should be, but Kira will double check that after the webinar. So, and that definitely let us know if stuff like that's wonky.
Next question is, how would this application or the expansion application change if an LIA wants to use subcontractors? Would the funding be awarded to the requesting LIA to be distributed to the subcontractors? Is this something the state would approve?
We currently fund programs that subcontract for home visiting services. So you would build your budget and your staffing plan all in exactly the same way. We'd want to see, but then in your budget, your subcontract line would have be larger than if you weren't delivering if you weren't subcontracting for home visits, if that makes sense. So you can definitely subcontract if you can build a case for it. But I would say your staffing plan needs to reflect your staff that you currently employ, but also the staff employed through the subcontractor. Your whole implementation plan needs to be cohesive. So, and I would say you might need to explain that someplace I'm not sure where you could explain it, but someplace in the body of the application questions, you'd explain that. So why subcontracting is a good choice for your community.
Next question, is there a requirement to already be implementing an eligible HV model in order to apply for the startup?
No, actually, if you're already implementing, then you're not in startup phase. So
if we are already serving a few families with other funding, can we be considered a startup for this funding?
That's a really good question. I think you have to look again at the implementation science framework and feel like, where do you fit? Where do you kind of feel like your organization fits? And if you can build a case that you're in the implementation startup phase, then that's where you fit. So I don't know what a few families is and if you've been dabbling versus now you're going to really do it. I mean, that's really up to you to determine and then to clarify with us in your application. Dabbling.
Yeah.
I'm gonna dabble. I don't recommend dabbling in home visiting. It's a lot of work to dabble.
We'll give just another minute or two, see if there's any more questions that come in.
Are there slides after this one?
There's just
When we get there, okay.
The other thing I was going to say is we're constantly looking to build the portfolio and build our reach of home visiting, and we look forward to, although we can't guarantee, additional funding opportunities in the future. And so when I ask you to look at that implementation science framework, right now we have 2 procurements that are focusing on 2 stages in implementation science. We project that going forward we maybe have other opportunities in the next year or 2, and we might target, depending on the advice of the Home Visiting Advisory Committee and the Oversight Partnership Group, that we might focus funds on other parts of the framework. So if you don't feel like you fit here now, it's not the end of the story or not the end of the opportunities. But we expect more to be coming. We can't guarantee that right now.
Any more questions?
No more questions.
No more questions.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure. Yeah, this is your last chance to get a question answered before the 24th of September. So think hard.
17.
Oh, 17th.
Yeah.
Well, but we can't word it. Yeah, exactly. We're going to summarize everything on the 24th. So you have till the 17th to ask a question.
You are now on your last slide.
Perfect.
There was a question slide that I didn't see.
Well,
I
yeah.
should have gone to that one.
So again, the questions are due September 17th, and we will post all of them on the 27th. So if you come up with anything between now and then, please send them in to home.visiting@dcyf.wa.gov. And on your screen, you should see the submission and deadline. Please email just the one packet to the same email address. And again, they're due on October 3rd at 4 p.m. And no applications or supporting documents will be accepted after the deadline for any reason. So please note that. Any other questions right now? Okay. Thank you all for participating. Anything else?
Yeah, no, we're good. Thank you. Welcome. Goodbye.